I want to call our board meeting together to order, and I want to ask that we approve tonight's agenda, which is before you. Ms. Hutchison.
I move that we approve the agenda.
Have a second? Mr. Cates, second. Any discussion? Mr. Lovelace, excuse me, Ms. Hammond. Mr. Lovelace.
I wanted to make.
Yeah. Is the light on? Wait a minute.
Okay, on now. Okay. Because of the inclusion of item 3C above, from the above agenda, it is my opinion that it is contrary to the South Carolina Code of Laws and case law rulings of the South Carolina Supreme Court. I make the motion that item 3C be removed from the executive session agenda and moved to the discussion agenda of this meeting. And I have an attachment, the South Carolina State Code sections authorizing executive session, Freedom of Information Act, section 30-4-70, and the Freedom of Information Act update, executive sessions, Municipal Association of South Carolina, June 2015, respectfully submitted, Ken Lovelace.
Is there a second to Mr. Lovelace's amendment? Ms. Hammond, I'll recognize you. Yes.
Okay. I think I heard it, but it's
Concerning
concerning item C.
item C, and he gave the same information that I believe he sent out in an email with the code. All right. So we'll first have discussion on Mr. Lovelace's amendment. Mr. Lovelace, I'll come to you first since you made that amendment.
Okay, well, according to the information that I have, anything that's a generic situation with laws that don't specifically talk about the sale of a certain piece of property, just the fact that we're educating ourselves on the law, I don't think that falls within the terms of executive session, and I've been advised of such. I just want to make sure that that is the case.
Mr. Gann, we have our attorney here. Would we ask for him to render an opinion on this matter?
Mr. Montgomery, I know that you and I have talked about this and the concern a person had, but would you explain the differential between this and maybe an open board briefing, please?
Well, I think, Mr. Chair, I mean, my opinion on this is because we're talking about strategies with regard to the property, and we're not concentrating on a specific piece of property, and that we are going to discuss some legal strategies that we may be dealing with and some issues that we may be dealing with that will require legal action on the part of the district. I believe that this action and this description is adequate to fulfill the mandates of the Freedom of Information Act, and it's certainly my view that what the board is purporting to do under 3C there is proper.
Thank you, Mr. Montgomery. Ms. Hammond, could you hear that? I hope. Basically, I believe, and Mr. Montgomery, you correct me if I'm wrong. Ms. Hammond, can you hear me? I think Mr. Montgomery just said that this was to discuss strategy, the potential for a piece of property, the process that you would go through, and it doesn't relate to any specific piece of property. And he felt like, in his experience as an attorney, that we've met the letter of the law 100%. So that's our feed from our district council. Any other discussion from our?
I just wanted to ask one thing.
Okay. You want to ask, Mr.
I wanted to ask you.
You want to ask me?
Because I'm not clear on what it is. Does this pertain to more than one piece of property, or
This
just?
is my understanding. We're going to talk about, and this is something that came out of the board officers meeting. We're going to talk about management of school district properties, and the best way to find that out will be an executive session. But we're not talking about one specific property at all. We're talking about strategies, inquiries we may have had, and how to handle that going forward. We've, over the years, and I realize you've been on the board 6 months, but we have had people that have approached the district about properties, and we own properties, and this is a session of strategy about any of our properties that how to go forward on a property. Mr. Montgomery, am I in the ballpark with that explanation? I want to give that's my understanding.
Yes, Mr. Chair, and it's also with regard to recommendations of legal action that we may take to assist the district in that process.
Additional piece would maybe be any additional legal actions that might be required to move forward in a process on any property. We're not talking about specific properties tonight. So I hope that helps. Any other question? Ms. Hutchison?
I was just going to add that there is the possibility that questions will arise about specific parcels of property too.
And Ms. Hudson, point well taken. What you're saying in executive session, questions could come up about, but there's no offer that we're trying to get to a certain point. It's my understanding. We didn't ask Mr. Montgomery to do that for us tonight. All right? Ms. Hammond, I believe, Ms. Hammond first, and then I'll come back to Ms. Gardner. Ms. Hammond, if you would,
Thank you. I just wanted to make clear, which I had said to you, my thought on this was simply, based on conversations we had had before as with the board, even before I think we had new members, there are certain laws that we do have to follow anytime taxpayers' properties being sold. So I just assumed that general information was what we were getting tonight. So that I wanted to make that clear. That was why I had concern, which I'd shared with you, and I just wanted to put that on the record.
okay. Thank you, Ms. Hammond. Ms. Gardner?
My concern with this ultimately is that we need to make sure that we're going into a learning session for ourselves to know what we need to do. I would like for this same information to be presented to us in public, because in executive session, we are allowed to, when we leave the executive session, we won't be allowed to tell anybody what we've learned under the ethics and codes of the executive session. So I would like, because this is just as important for the public to know what's going on as what we know that we can and cannot do.
Chris, let's ask our attorney again. My thought is almost everything we hear now, if it put the district at a disadvantage or disadvantage our situation on any piece of property, we probably want to avoid that. But that's just buying and selling or doing nothing with a piece of property. But Ms. Montgomery, you weigh in on that. I think that's a reasonable request for a later session to have an open session on something.
I think that it's appropriate to have a public session on that. My concern about this initial session is I believe there would be necessarily some legal advice given and some questions given that may well involve attorney-client privilege information. And I believe that conducting that particular part of the meeting in public session can be detrimental to the district's legal position in dealing with this property and property issues. So I really think we should have two separate options here. I think that what we want to do this evening, and one of the things I'm going to discuss with the board is potential, what I'll call potential legal action that we may want to take or need to take related to some of this property. I think we can do that. And then if we want to have a general session with the public after we get some legal guidance and make some determinations, I think that's perfectly appropriate. And as I advise the chair, I'd be available to do that at any of the next several meetings if you'd like to do that.
With what you're thinking, without compromising the district's position property-wise. Okay.
Yeah, that's
Right.
good.
Good
Thank you.
discussion. Input, questions, discussion? All right, seeing none, the first vote we'll have will be on Mr. Lovelace's amendment, as we've discussed. All those in favor of Mr. Lovelace's amendment to have this item not in executive session, but in public session, and to amend the agenda, please raise your hand. That would be Mr. Lovelace, Ms. Hammond, Ms. Gardner. All those opposed, please raise your hand. And that would be the rest of the board. So the motion fails 4-3. So now we go back to the original motion, which is approval of the agenda as printed. And we've had a motion, we've had a second. Is there any further discussion related to the agenda as printed? Seeing none, all those in favor of the agenda as printed, please raise your hand. And that passes unanimously. That brings us to, I need a motion to enter executive session to consider the following items. Item 3A, selected employment items, shown in Exhibit A. Item 3B, receipt of legal advice and discussion of the status of civil action number 2013 CP-40-01897. Item C, receipt of legal advice regarding management of real property inventory owned by the school district. Item D, receipt of legal advice regarding potential professional services contract procurement. Those 4 items. I need a motion to enter executive session for that. Ms. Hutchison.
I move that we enter executive session to consider the items that you outlined.
And do we have a second? Mr. Cates, any discussion? Ms. Melton, Dr. Melton, I thought you raised your hand. You want to discuss that? Okay. All right, seeing none, all those in favor, please raise your hand. That passes unanimously. Ms. Hammond, we'll be back about 7 o'clock. So be,
I'm sorry, I'm gonna miss, but thank you, Mr. Cat.
All right.
Talk to people about things I couldn't
Right.
do that tonight.
thank Ms. Price again and Ms. Hutchison for reminding me that we had this technology, so thank you. Thanks. Bye-bye. See you in a while.